Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is Art of the Cards. Okay, so, this is actually a unscripted bit in the video that I'm going to be doing right here. It's not Art of the Cards anymore, and I really didn't want to have to re-record the entire damn video in order to just change that one bit there. And, to give a bit of context about why it changed, basically a Reddit user by the name of ScorchKid notified me on the latest post from my last video, the Vampires one, that there was someone online who has the name Art of the Cards, and they run a business on it where they make full art commissions. By the way, link to them in the description. They're actually really helpful about, you know, just, they were very understanding about the fact that, you know, I didn't know that they existed before I started my series, and that all of this was happening. So the name for the series is now changed. It's now Craft of the Cards. So yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, that's the change that was happening, and you know, it's now Craft of the Cards. And now I guess back to the video. This series is fundamentally focused on grading the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, looking at the aesthetics of the art, how it syncs up to the effect, and how it relates to the card's name. We work through the archetypes in alphabetical order, started off at a random point, which in this case was you. You may notice that if I was following a strict order, we'd be doing Vendreads about now, but because that video would become irrelevant almost immediately after me posting it, due to the guarantee of more support that they'll have received by then, I'm skipping that one and going directly to Venoms. This will generally be my policy for any archetypes whose most recent support was in, like, let's say the last 2 years or so. I gave an exception to Vampires because they hadn't received support in ages. I'd already written most of the script and then it started, so yeah, that was its whole thing. But anyway, so that means after we skip over Vendreads, we get to move on to the slippery, sucky boys themselves, the Venoms. These are a pretty small archetype from GX used by Viper when he tried to bargain with an alien hermaphrodite in order to bring his dead son back, before said alien hermaphrodite proceeded to tell him to take a hike so she could be with her husband, which she knew as a child. First off, we have Venom Snake, and you know, out of all the places I expected to finally find the Metal Gear archetype, fitting it into Venoms was a masterstroke. I mean, there are already like, what, 16 different varieties of snake anyway? Some are called Big Boss, I think so. Yeah, this should be a breeze. Oh. Wait, is this not the right art? Oh, this is. I mean, okay, I guess. Oh, I still think my idea would have been a lot cooler. In all seriousness, they could have been doing a little more with the names for this archetype. Their first card is Venom Snake, and honestly, was there no better way to describe this? I mean, okay, given the snake it's based on, you could have just gone with Venom Rattletail or something other than Venom Snake. It's literally the most boring name on the planet and could literally apply to any damn card in the archetype, because they're all snakes. I do actually quite like the design for this card. It's reasonably proportioned and well drawn, showing a decent amount of work in the art, and while the color scheme is more reminiscent of a coral snake, the kunai-like knife on its tail actually seems to imply that this is a rattlesnake of some description. The blades all over its body are an interesting design choice. It makes it slightly more interesting, but the background for this card is really bad. It looks like someone took the ugliest carpet they could find and then decided to use that as the background for the card instead of an actual landscape or something interesting. The bruised blues and purples clash horrifyingly with each other, and not in a way that makes me think of venom or poison in any way either. It's just plain ugly. The effect is somewhat bog standard for Venom monsters, placing a counter on an opponent's monster and preventing you from attacking. This mostly goes to their field spell, Venom Swamp, that reduces the attack of any monster with Venom counters, and eventually destroys them when the attack reaches 0. This is really nice thematically, and shows the weakening power of the Venom monsters, their bites eventually causing death once your monsters are weak enough. In the end, this card just edges out a 3 out of 5. While it doesn't exactly blow me away, there are certainly elements about the card that I like, but other elements I have severe critiques about. It just manages to edge in with the design in relation to the rest of the archetype that is just average. Their next card is a vanilla monster, Venom Cobra. No, not you. Well, this time the name is a tad more specific, but still utterly generic. This is indeed a Cobra, and it is part of the Venom archetype. Nothing else. No descriptive details about what it can do that makes it different, just a regular old Cobra, apparently. Once again, the design's fine enough. The grey and the red of the cobra's body are nice contrasts, and I like the fact that they chose to interpret the intricate patterns that often decorate the hoods of actual cobras and make them into eyes on this version. It makes them look much cooler and adds some nice elements to the design overall. The background this time is nice as well, the greens and blues mixed together giving me a more poisonous vibes than the black-purple mix of Venom Snake. The flavor text is definitely disappointing though. It makes references to the stat line with it having harder armed scales explaining the high defense, while the predictable patterns of attack explains the weak attack. However, it doesn't really have any real relation to the rest of the archetype, and when I was putting the video together, I had to keep on checking that this didn't come out at some earlier point and was just added in by mistake because of the code word, and just got included in the general search like the starving Venom monsters did. This came out in Tactical Evolution, like all the rest of them, so I have no real reason of explaining why this didn't try and expand briefly on the lore of the monsters rather than just giving a description of what this card is. While it fits into the archetype due to a technicality, this has no place in their playstyle, which revolves entirely around Venom counters, which this can't disperse, and there's literally no room for it in the archetype in its entirety, and therefore gets a 2 out of 5. It's saved by its decent art, but trust me, if the art was even a smidge worse, this would be getting an easy 1 out of 5. The next card is Venom Serpent, which is literally just the same name as Venom Snake, just with a different synonym. Okay then, how about the art? It has the same background. Okay then, well, at least the snakes are different. Somewhat. The design this time, again, is only somewhat interesting, the two heads being all that makes this different from your literal garden variety snake, and by that I mean a quite literal garden snake. At least Venom Snake had the blades going for it as a unique element in the design. This one looks like every standard bog variety level 3 in an RPG looking monster ever. The effect can't even help it. It's just the same effect as Snake minus the attack restriction. It can't even place 2 Venom counters to reflect its 2 heads. This card is a disappointment and gets a clear 2 out of 5. The art isn't bad, it's just unoriginal, and that perfectly sums up what the rest of this card is, an unoriginal piece of garbage. Rounding off the last of the regular monsters, we have Venom Boa, once again with a name that just describes what type of snake this is. Again, the background is the same, which already doesn't bode well, but once again, the design is quite nice. I like the fact that they chose blue and yellow, they work well off each other, and the jagged edges and texturing of the card actually look quite nice. The 3 eyes is an interesting point as well. Again, the fact that there are 3 of them stop this from being entirely boring, but it's still pretty standard. The other snake on its tail is also a nice touch and syncs up nicely with the effect, unlike the last card, which allows you to place 2 Venom counters on an opponent's monster. This means that it gets a 2 out of 5. Once again, it does just enough with the relation of the design and effect in order to avoid total savagery, but it's just so mediocre. Moving on to the boss monster set, we have Venomenon, King of Poisonous Snakes. Finally, a name that does not quite literally describe what it is, and it only took us to the fucking boss monster to get to it. In any case, the design of this card is reasonable. With the dark green being the primary color of the snakes, and thusly the primary color of the card itself, the gold, red, and blue do very well to contrast it. I like the gold hood and the snake headdress he has. It adds nicely to the bulk of the head, which would otherwise have looked quite small without it. The snakes around the shoulders are also nice and draw attention to the gem at the center of his chest, and I also like the interlocking snakes that form a belt of sorts around his waist. Though if there is one element I would like to change, it would be his hands. Why are they snakes, especially multiple little ones? It looks stupid. Like he's gonna try and write with his snake hands, or manipulate something with them. If you wanted to give him hands, give him roughly human hands made up of tightly woven snakes, or more directly anthropomorphize him. It's just this weird mix where they tried to make it look weird and alien that just makes him look silly instead. The background is kind of disappointing. I can see that they were going for a more smoke-like effect in the background to make it more mystical, but it's not really consistent with the rest of the archetype. The effect is nice, with it gaining power directly in proportion to how many monsters are in the grave and being unaffected by Venom Swamp, just to make sure that the naming conventions didn't matter. The Venom archetype, at least somewhat in terms of card theming, is pretty tenuous, but they do seem to have some pulpy sort of vibe to them, with the snake religion aspect, so it makes sense that their king and deity in the next card would both draw power from what I assume is sacrifice of their lesser snake brethren. In any case, it also has a revival effect, which is quite nice, allowing for it to reform as if made, quite literally, from the body of multiple snakes. It gets a 3 out of 5. The art and effect are both nice, but none really stand out especially, so this is more average than anything else. Finally, we get to their last monster, Venoms, deity of poisonous snakes. So I'm just going to highlight straight off the fact that she's a snake lady with snake arms and tiny little snakes in those snake arms in place of those tongues. Beyond that, I generally like the color scheme. The dark blue works well against the burnt orange underbelly, and the highlight of the main body are also quite nice. The gold headdress and hair are nice, though I think they could have been a bit more ornate to fit the status of the card better. The background is nice as well, with the card seeming to give off an air of power quite literally, and further in the background there seem to be beams radiating from the bottom right corner. The effect is really nice as well, it having to be summoned by the effect of Rise of the Snake Deity, which makes sense, and the Omni Protection effect is only really fitting of a deity card. Isn't that right, Obelisk, Ra, Slifer, Haman, Uriah, and Raviel? The last part of the effect is probably the most amazing though, giving you a win condition for having attacked 3 times and caused battle damage. This makes sense given the fact that attacking you is injecting you with venom, and enough of it will kill you in the end. This card gets a 4 out of 5. So far, the best card in the archetype, in both terms of effect theming and design overall. Their first spell is Venom Shot, and actually looks quite badass. I mean, if you have Phenomenon in the corner, his hand extended to let his pet snakes shoot forward, the art has a very palpable sense of motion to it, and the yellow eyes and the gaping maw make for a very striking image. The subtle line work helps to emphasize the speed and power at which the snake is striking, and the gobs of poison just seem to leap off the page. The red eyes in the background are menacing, and the background itself, being bright red, allows for a greater sense of urgency when it comes to the card in general. The effect is good as well, matching very closely with the name and art, and it allows you to sacrifice a monster from the deck in order to place 2 venom counters on a monster, which is really nice given that this is literally shooting venom at a target. This card also gets a 4 out of 5, it's really good overall. Their final spell is the field spell, Venom Swamp, which is the main linchpin of the deck. It allows you to scatter venom counters around the field, which weaken monsters. It makes a lot of sense, but the artwork isn't anything truly special in this case. It works in a certain sense. The water is poisonous and purple, the trees look dark and dull, but it could have been more twisted, fungal molds everywhere, and snakes you could see just swimming through the water. It's a nice card overall, and gets a solid 3 out of 5. Nothing special, but nothing too horrible about the card in general, and it does act as the thematic linchpin for the deck, so I do give a bit of leeway there. Their first trap is Rise of the Snake Deity, and the art depicts Venoms rising from a pile of mud. It's honestly kind of disappointing. I would have expected something a bit more than rising out of a pile of literal muck from a card called Rise of the Snake Deity. While it tries with a dark miasma and glowing eyes, it can look intimidating, rising from what is, again, an unavoidable pile of swamp muck. For what it's worth, I like the fact that you can't ram Venoms into something in order to activate the effect, once going back to the pulpy snake religion sacrifice cult thing that the archetype has going on. So this gets a 3 out of 5. Once again, nothing too special, but also not bad enough to slip into outright mediocrity. Their next normal trap is Ambush Fangs, and depicts Venom Cobra deciding to take a crack at Giga Gaga Gigo for some reason. I'm pretty sure that the card lore isn't related, so this is more of a cameo than anything else. In any which case, the art is mostly fine again. The background once again has a lot of subtle line work that draws the eyes to Cobra going for the bite on Gaga Gigo. I'm not really sure where the light source is supposed to be on the card. From the lighting on Cobra, it would seem to be behind him, but it's also shining off the back of Gaga Gigo's armor. I don't know, maybe it's under them? In any case, it's still good. The position of Giga Gaga Gigo clearly showing his surprise, and Cobra's surging movements are nicely conveyed. I love the effect, allowing you to stop and attack and place a venom counter, as it implies that one of your monsters was waiting in the depths of the swamp to strike and then going for his target in a literal Venom ambush. And in which case, this card gets a 3 out of 5 again. Venom surprisingly have a pretty well-designed spell and trap lineup that goes a long way for making up for the sins of earlier monsters, which is actually interesting, because the spell and trap lineup is also the only playable part of the archetype in general. Venom Burn is a trap that would have worked so much better as a standard monster effect, or even one that one or two monsters had. They could have placed certain counters on themselves, and upon activation or causing battle damage, transferred them to your opponent and burned them for damage with their deadly poison. In any case, I'm not really sure what the snake on the artwork is supposed to be, or how the venom is supposed to be transferred to the player. Are they sucking it out, or... Wait, is the snake on this supposed to be a venom counter? But I thought that was just a way to represent the venom being injected into the monsters by cards, or the damage they take from operating in such a poisonous environment like Venom Swamp. Apparently no, it was actual acid snakes or whatever biting onto the monsters in the show, and this trap represents them turning off the monsters in order to attack the player. Once again, the art itself is decent. The yellow splash in the background, while looking, unfortunately, like a slash of piss, does contrast very well to the blue watery snake counter. I love how they drew the snakes on this, and Venom shot starting to uncoil and attack like they were previously resting, but just started to move. It's decent in the end, and even if it does seem a bit weird in how it treats the cards overall, it gets a 3 out of 5. Their last card is Snake Deity's Command, and plays into the pulp theming of the larger snake monsters, with the classic safari getup of the guy being swarmed by the snakes, and Venoms looking on in the background like your crazy ex-girlfriend who just decided to drop by for the 5th time in 2 weeks to see how you were getting on. I like how they picked out her eyes in the gem with the glow, and the guy looks appropriately terrified. Problem is, while the effect matches nicely with the name, allowing you to sacrifice one monster in order to stop an effect, allowing Venoms to extend her effect from only protecting herself in order to protect others, I see no way for it to relate to the card art. I mean, I could say that she's commanding her snakes to attack, this literal who, but I think if they wanted to make that Snake Deity's Command, they would have had her more openly in the art instead of just a shadow in the background. In the end, it gets another 3 out of 5. The art, while interesting in spots, isn't truly amazing, and the effect relationship isn't anything special in the end. Summing this all up, Venoms are a disappointing archetype. While they have some standout cards, and their spell and trap card is pretty nice looking, their main monsters are just boring retreads of one another. They have no real creativity in the archetype, and what little there is squandered on cards with boring names and samey effects. My card of the archetype this time is Venom Shot, just for being so much more atmospheric. The way the snake is drawn, its gaping maw and venom flying everywhere, really adds a lot to the card and makes it by far the one with the best art in this archetype. This, unfortunately, gives the archetype a 2 out of 5. Too many of the cards are just unoriginal retreads of one another, and while some of the later cards really work towards saving it, too many more are just boring and samey, and this is the core of the archetype, you know? While the boss monsters are special and do take a place usually as having the best art in the archetype, I also want to take a look at how well the archetype looks as a whole. If you're playing this just by itself, if you're playing mostly Venom monsters, would your archetype look sexy? And this does not. They're so cripplingly boring that this gets a 2 out of 5. There's no other way to put it. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for stopping by the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos, and without further ado, this is Nuke, signing out.